Emma Parker woke up on a quiet Sunday morning with a strange feeling in her chest, a mix of hope, worry, and something she couldn't fully name. The winter light coming through her bedroom window felt colder than usual, almost as if the room itself knew she had been trying too hard to ignore the distance growing between her and her husband, Daniel. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was the kind of slow drift that happened when two people stopped paying attention to the small things that once held them close. For months now, Daniel had been coming home later than usual. Sometimes he walked through the door with tired eyes and barely noticed the dinner she had prepared. Other nights, he didn't even sit with her on the couch like he used to. Instead, he would head straight to the study, saying he needed to finish something. She believed him. Daniel was the kind of man who put everything into his work, but lately, the excuses felt heavier than they used to. Emma wasn't angry. She was confused, hurt in a quiet way, and scared that saying anything might push him even further away. She loved him deeply, but love didn't erase the fear of losing someone without knowing why. She missed the small things, the way he used to laugh at her silly jokes, the way he used to take her hand when they crossed the street, the way he used to sit next to her in the evenings and wrap his arm around her shoulders like she was the safest place he knew. So that Sunday, while pouring herself a cup of coffee, she made a decision that came from a warm, hopeful part of her heart. She would create something nice for him, a moment that reminded him of the life they shared, the connections he had, the friendships he once cherished. Daniel had 3 close friends: Mark, Jason, and Tyler. They had been inseparable for years, but lately even they rarely saw him. Daniel always said he was too busy or too drained, and Emma wondered if reconnecting with them might help him feel more grounded. It wasn't just about cheering him up. It was about reminding both of them that they weren't alone, that life didn't have to be rushed or distant. She wanted their home to feel warm again, to feel alive, with that thought guiding her. Emma sent messages to the 3 friends, inviting them over for dinner. She told them she wanted to surprise Daniel, hoping they would agree and show up with the same enthusiasm she felt. To her relief, all 3 responded kindly, saying they would be there. She smiled for the first time in days. Feeling hopeful as she began preparing for the evening, she spent the next hours cleaning the house. But not in a frantic why more, like she was preparing a space for something good to happen. She lit soft candles in the living room, set the table with simple but pretty decorations, and cooked Daniel's favorite meal. The smell of garlic, herbs, and warm bread filled the house, giving it the cozy feeling she had missed as she worked. She kept imagining Daniel's face when he walked through the door and saw everyone waiting for him. In her mind, he would be surprised, touched, maybe even relieved to be surrounded by the people who knew him best. She pictured laughter, easy conversations, and maybe even the first real smile she had seen from him in months. That hope carried her through every minute of preparation. By the time evening arrived, everything looked perfect. The house glowed softly, the table looked inviting, and the food was ready. Emma changed into a simple light blue sweater and brushed her hair quickly, wanting to look calm and put together but not overly formal. She didn't want the evening to feel like an event. She wanted it to feel natural. It's like something that belonged in their life. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Emma's heart fluttered as she opened the door. Mark stood there first, offering a warm smile. Behind him were Jason and Tyler, each holding small gifts: a bottle of sparkling juice, a box of chocolates, and a bouquet of simple white flowers. Emma thanked them, but she noticed something immediately. The men exchanged glances, quiet ones that didn't match the cheerful atmosphere she had created. At first, she brushed it off as surprise. They weren't expecting a formal dinner. After all, but as they stepped inside, their expressions didn't soften. They sat on the couch, thanked her for the invitation, and complimented the decorations. But something felt slightly restrained. Emma sat across from them, hands gently folded, waiting for the right moment to tell them how excited she was for Daniel to see them. But before she could speak, Mark leaned forward, his voice low. "So, Daniel said he invited us. We weren't sure what this was about." Emma blinked, confused. "Daniel, no, I invited you." I thought she didn't finish. She didn't know how to finish. Jason exchanged a quick look with Tyler, and the air in the room tightened. It felt like the moment before a storm, not loud, but tense in a way you could feel in your chest. Emma, Tyler said softly, he told us he wanted to talk to us today. Something important. Her stomach dropped not because she thought Daniel had done something wrong, but because she suddenly realized she didn't know what had been happening in his heart. She didn't know what he was struggling with. She didn't know why he had invited them himself, or what he wanted to talk about. She thought this dinner was her surprise. But maybe Daniel had a surprise of his own, one she knew nothing about. Before she could ask anything else, the front door opened. Daniel walked in earlier than expected. And the look on his face was not the look of a man walking into a warm surprise. It was the look of someone who had just discovered the truth. He had been hiding, was now sitting in his living room. His eyes widened. His breath caught, and the room fell into a silence so deep Emma could hear her heartbeat. And that was the moment she realized. This dinner was not going to go the way she imagined. The moment Daniel walked through the door, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a sudden heaviness that made everyone sit straighter. Emma felt her heart move up into her throat as she watched her husband freeze in place. His hand still rested on the doorknob as if he wasn't sure whether to walk in or walk back out. Mark stood up halfway, unsure whether to greet Daniel or wait for him to speak. Jason and Tyler both sat still, their eyes darting between Emma and Daniel. The tension was sharp enough to feel, but still wrapped in silence. Emma rose from her chair slowly. "You're home early," she said gently, hoping to soften the moment. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't even try to pretend everything was normal. "Why's everyone here?" he asked quietly, the confusion and concern blending in his voice. "I invited them," Emma said. "I thought it would be a nice surprise. You haven't spent time with them in a while?" But Daniel's friends exchanged another uneasy glance, and Emma felt her worry deepen. Something wasn't lining up. Something was off in a way she couldn't ignore. Jason cleared his throat first, trying to ease the tension. "Dan, we thought you were the one who invited us." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. I did. I asked you guys to come by so we could talk." Emma felt the floor tilt beneath her. She looked at Daniel, trying to understand what he meant. "Talk about what? You never told me anything." Daniel's expression softened with guilt, but before he could respond, Mark stepped in gently. "Emma, we didn't know about the dinner. Came because Daniel told us he needed to discuss something important today." Emma's heart began to beat faster, not out of fear of something terrible, but because she suddenly felt shut out of her own marriage. She had been trying to create a warm moment, a reconnecting evening. Yet she was the one kept out of the circle. Instead of asking what the conversation was supposed to be about, she watched Daniel closely. His shoulders were tense, and he looked exhausted, not the usual work exhaustion, but the emotional kind that came from carrying too many worries alone. "I didn't know how to tell you," Daniel finally said, lowering his gaze. Emma took a slow breath, steady but hurt. "Why not? We're married, Daniel. We're supposed to share things, even hard things." Daniel moved further inside the room, shutting the door behind him. He set his keys on the table, and the sound echoed unnecessarily loud in the quiet space. "I know. I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want you to think less of me." The words stung because they revealed a truth she hadn't seen clearly before. Daniel wasn't hiding something from her. He was hiding something inside himself. Something he thought she wouldn't be able to handle. Emma tried to speak, but the confusion tangled her thoughts. Instead, she listened as Jason stepped forward. "Emma, it's not what you think. Dan isn't keeping secrets like that. He just hasn't been himself lately." Tyler added, "We've noticed it at work too. He's been carrying a lot." Emma turned to Daniel again, watching the sadness in his expression. She realized there was no anger in him, just fear. The quiet, kind people hid behind long work hours and tired smiles. Still, she couldn't understand why he had turned to his friends instead of her. That hurt sat heavy in her chest. "What exactly were you planning to talk about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling slightly. "I was going to tell the guys first, then talk to you." "I know that sounds wrong. I just wanted to figure out the right way to say everything before I came to you with it." Mark glanced at Emma compassionately. "He's been overwhelmed, Emma." "Really overwhelmed." She nodded but didn't interrupt. Daniel took a slow, unsteady breath. "I've been struggling at work. Not just normal stress, real, constant pressure. Every day feels like I'm trying to hold everything together with my bare hands. I feel like I'm failing, and I didn't want you to see that. You're always strong, always calm. I didn't want to bring more weight into our home." Emma felt a sudden ache behind her eyes. She had sensed something was wrong, but she hadn't guessed how heavy his burden had become. She stepped closer. "Daniel, you don't have to be perfect for me. You never had to hide your struggles." He looked up, his eyes tired but honest. "I know, but when I come home and see you taking care of everything, smiling, trying to keep us steady, feel like I'm letting you down." She shook her head slowly. "Letting me down isn't the same as telling me the truth." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy with confusion, it was heavy with feelings that needed to surface. Tyler spoke gently, breaking the tension. "Emma, we didn't come here expecting to walk into something like this. We just wanted to support Daniel." Jason nodded. "We were going to help him figure out what to say. He didn't want to hide from you. He just didn't know how to start." Emma pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the quiet throb of emotions she wasn't sure how to process. She had been so focused on bringing everyone together to help. Daniel felt better that she hadn't realized he had already reached out, just not to her. But instead of anger, she felt a fragile tenderness rise inside her. It wasn't easy for Daniel to admit he was struggling. He wasn't the kind of man who shared his burdens easily. That he had reached out at all meant he had been hurting more than she imagined. Daniel finally sat down, the weight on his shoulders visible. Kema joined him slowly, sitting close enough to show she cared even if she didn't fully understand. "We're supposed to help each other," she said softly. "You don't have to protect me from your problems." Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "I know that now. Just didn't want to worry you. I thought if I could fix everything before telling you, then maybe you wouldn't feel the stress I'm feeling." Emma reached for his hand, not with dramatic emotion, but with quiet, steady love. "You don't have to fix everything alone." He squeezed her hand gently, the relief in his eyes subtle but real. The room, once filled with tension, slowly warmed with understanding. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it felt like the first honest moment they had shared in a long time. And Emma knew this was just the beginning of the truth she needed to hear. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, his hands pressed together as if he were holding something fragile inside them. The room felt warmer now, but the weight of unspoken feelings still lingered. Emma watched him carefully, trying to read his expression, trying to understand the fear behind his silence. She didn't interrupt him, even though questions rushed through her mind. She knew he needed space to gather his thoughts, and she wanted to give him the chance to speak honestly. Daniel took a slow breath and finally looked up, his voice barely above a whisper as he began to talk. He admitted that the struggles he had hinted at were deeper than he had let on. He had been overwhelmed for months, not just by work deadlines, but by a feeling that he had lost control of his life. Every day he felt like he was running behind. Like he was failing at everything: his job, his responsibilities, and now his marriage. He confessed he had been waking up with a tightness in his chest, a pressure that made it hard to breathe sometimes. He didn't tell Emma because he didn't want her to think he was weak or unable to handle things. He had always been the steady one, the calm one, the dependable one. Admitting he was struggling felt like admitting he wasn't the man he wanted to be for her. That fear was what pushed him to reach out to his friends first. He thought telling them would help him figure out the right words to say to Emma. But the more he tried to hide the stress, the more distant he became, and the harder it became to talk at all. Emma listened in silence, each word he spoke cutting through the worry she had been carrying alone. She hadn't known how much pressure was building inside him. She had seen the tired eyes, the quiet evenings, the distant smiles. But she hadn't realized how deep the storm had grown. When Daniel paused, Mark stepped in gently and explained that Daniel had reached out a few days earlier, saying he needed advice. He had been embarrassed and unsure, but his friends had noticed the change in him for a while. They had seen him struggle to focus, struggle to relax, and struggle to enjoy even simple moments. That was why they didn't question it when he asked them to meet. They knew he wasn't trying to hide things from Emma. He just didn't know how to let her see this vulnerable side of him. Hearing this softened the ache in Emma's heart, but it didn't erase her hurt. She gently asked Daniel why he didn't trust her with the truth sooner. Daniel lowered his eyes again and explained that he had been afraid of disappointing her. He had always admired her strength, her calmness, her ability to solve problems without breaking down. He felt like he was the one slipping behind. And the idea of telling her he was struggling felt like he was admitting he was no longer the husband she deserved. His honesty hit Emma harder than she expected. She didn't see him as failing. She saw him as someone she loved deeply, someone who didn't need to be perfect for her to stay by his side. But she also understood his fear. People often hid their struggles not because they didn't trust their loved ones, but because they didn't want to burden them. She moved closer, not touching him yet, just giving him her presence. Daniel continued, saying there were days he would sit in his car after work, unable to step out because he felt too overwhelmed to face the evening. Other days he pretended everything was fine, hoping the feeling would pass, but it never did. Each day added another layer until he felt trapped in his own silence. Emma's eyes softened as he spoke, her heart pulling between pain and compassion. She didn't interrupt. She let him pour everything out. Daniel told her he had considered talking to her many times, but every time he saw her working around the house, smiling through her worries, or making space for him to relax, he felt ashamed that he couldn't match her strength. His friends listened quietly, their expressions full of support. Tyler leaned forward and reminded Daniel that everyone struggled at times, and hiding it only made the weight heavier. Jason added that reaching out wasn't a failure, was a sign of recognition, a step toward healing. Emma finally reached out and held Daniel's hand, her touch warm and steady. She told him gently that she didn't want him to pretend or carry things alone. She wasn't looking for perfection. She wanted honesty, connection, and partnership. Daniel's eyes filled with emotion he had been holding back for too long. He apologized, not for the stress he felt, but for shutting her out and letting fear guide him. He explained that when life got overwhelming, he didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like he was letting her down. Emma squeezed his hand and told him that leaning on each other was part of marriage. Real strength wasn't pretending everything was fine. It was choosing to share the truth even when it scared them. Daniel breathed shakily, relief mixing with vulnerability. The room felt lighter now, even though the conversation was heavy. His friends supported him with quiet encouragement, reminding him he wasn't alone. They cared for him deeply, and they cared about the marriage, too. Emma could tell this wasn't just about work stress. It was about the emotional wall he had built. The one she hadn't noticed growing until the distance between them became impossible to ignore. She realized how easy it was for two people to drift apart without meaning to. Sometimes life got messy and people forgot how to reach each other. But sitting there, holding his hand, listening to the truth he had struggled so hard to hide, she felt something new growing between them, understanding. Real, deep understanding. It wasn't dramatic or explosive, it was quiet, raw, and honest. Daniel admitted he had been afraid to ask for help because he didn't want to seem like a burden. Emma told him gently that he could never be a burden to her. She had married him for all his strengths and all his weaknesses. The night, which began with confusion and tension, was turning into a moment of healing. Not perfect or complete, but a beginning. And Emma knew this conversation was the turning point their relationship had needed for far too long. After hours of quiet conversation, laughter, and gentle confessions, the evening began to shift into something calmer, something warmer. Daniel and Emma had both shared parts of themselves they had kept hidden for months, and the tension that had filled the room at the start of the dinner was slowly dissolving. His friends, Mark, Jason, and Tyler, had stayed longer than expected, helping the couple navigate the fragile balance between honesty and reassurance. Daniel's voice had grown steadier as he spoke about his struggles, and Emma had responded with patience and love rather than anger or disappointment. The emotional walls between them were starting to crumble, replaced by understanding. It was a slow, delicate process. Daniel admitted that he had always feared that showing weakness would make Emma see him differently, that she might lose respect or faith in him. Emma, in turn, shared how she had felt him drifting away, how she had worried about the quiet distance that had crept between them. She explained that her decision to host the dinner wasn't about prying or control. It was about reminding both of them that life could still be joyful and warm, even during hard times. The friends nodded, quietly observing, allowing Emma and Daniel to take center stage in this intimate, emotional moment. Slowly, they began sharing lighter stories, anecdotes that reminded Daniel of happier, simpler times, moments before stress had clouded his days. Mark told a funny story about a work mishap that made Daniel laugh genuinely for the first time in weeks. Jason reminded him of a hiking trip they had all taken years ago when Daniel had been the planner, the one making everyone laugh, the anchor for the group. Tyler spoke about the small ways Daniel had always helped him, emphasizing that everyone faced challenges, but those challenges didn't diminish the good a person brought to others. Emma watched Daniel's shoulders relax and his smile return, soft, hesitant, but real. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, knowing that he was beginning to trust her again, to let her back into the quiet corners of his heart that he had locked away. The night carried on, and eventually the friends started to say their goodbyes. Emma and Daniel walked them to the door, exchanging hugs, quiet laughter, and promises to meet again soon. When the door closed, the room felt still. But it was a different kind of stillness, peaceful, intimate. A space that seemed charged with the understanding they had finally reached. Daniel turned to Emma, taking both her hands in his. His eyes, once clouded with worry, now shone with emotion he had struggled to express. "I'm sorry I made you feel shut out," he said softly. "I didn't want to burden you, but I see now that hiding things made everything worse." Emma smiled gently, squeezing his hands. "You don't have to carry everything alone. I want to be with you through the hard times, not just the easy ones. That's why I planned tonight. I wanted us to feel together again." I sat on the couch, shoulders brushing, breathing in the quiet after the storm of emotions. Daniel told her about the small moments during the past weeks when he had felt lost. Moments he hadn't shared because he didn't want to add to her worries. Emma listened, letting him speak without interruption, offering soft words of reassurance when his voice faltered. She reminded him that vulnerability was not weakness, that love wasn't about perfection but about trust, honesty, and sharing life even when it was messy. Daniel nodded, tears welling in his eyes, grateful for the patience and understanding she showed. He admitted he had forgotten, in the rush of work and expectations, how important it was to lean on the people who cared about him the most. Emma's heart ached and softened all at once. She realized that this moment, which began as a surprise dinner, had transformed into something far more meaningful, a bridge to reconnect their hearts, one honest word at a time. They spent the next hour talking quietly, making small promises to each other, to share their struggles, to listen without judgment, to make time for one another even when life felt overwhelming. There was no dramatics, no loud declarations, just steady, tender exchanges that spoke volumes about their love. Daniel promised to be more open with her, to let her in before the weight of stress became unbearable. Emma promised to check in gently, not to push, but to create space for conversation when needed. The night grew later, and the soft glow of candlelight filled the room, reflecting off the walls and the calm expressions on their faces. They leaned back on the couch, hands still intertwined, and allowed themselves a moment to simply breathe together, feel safe in each other's presence again. It wasn't just about resolving the issues that had Built Up It was about rediscovering the emotional connection that had brought them together in the first place. Daniel smiled softly at Emma, a smile full of gratitude and relief, and she returned it, feeling a renewed sense of closeness. They talked about future plans, small things at first, like taking a weekend trip or cooking a meal together without distractions. But also bigger ideas, ways to support each other, ways to face challenges as a team. The quiet intimacy of the night made the home feel warmer than ever. Not because of candles or food, but because of the honesty and trust that had returned. For Emma, the evening had been more than a surprise. It had been a revelation. She realized that love was not always about grand gestures or perfect days. It was about patience, understanding, and choosing to be present even when life felt complicated. Daniel felt lighter, no longer trapped by the walls he had built around his emotions. He understood that sharing his struggles didn't make him less of a man or a husband. It made him human, and Emma's love for him remained steady and unwavering. As they finally prepared for bed, Daniel held Emma close, whispering a quiet thank you for her patience, her thoughtfulness, and her unwavering support. She rested her head on his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat, and knew that tonight had changed them. The surprise dinner hadn't gone as planned, but it had achieved something far more important. It had reopened lines of communication, reminded them of the strength of their partnership, and strengthened the love that had never truly wavered. In the stillness of their home, with only the faint sounds of the night outside, Emma and Daniel found themselves reconnecting not through grand moments, but through quiet honesty, mutual understanding, and the gentle assurance that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. The night closed not with dramatic resolution, but with a tender, lasting promise that the truth, though sometimes shocking, could heal, restore, and bring two hearts closer than ever before. And as they drifted into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, the weight of unspoken fears had lifted, replaced by trust, warmth, and a love renewed.